Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for this online workshop of the new AMEB Horn Syllabus and Publications. My name is David Howell, and in addition to being the project officer of the Horn Syllabus Review, I am the typesetter and reprint manager in the AMEB Publications team. Very shortly, Ysolt Clark, the Syllabus Consultant for the Horn Review, will be presenting a workshop on levels 2 and 3 of the new Horn Syllabus, including the syllabus itself, as well as new publications and resources available. As Syllabus Consultant, Ysolt had primary responsibility for the review of the manual list, the selection of works for the new gradebooks and orchestral excerpts, and construction of the new technical work. However, the syllabus review process involved a number of horn specialists from around the country, so I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the entire team for their dedicated work on the project. Daryl Paulson, who reviewed every aspect of the new syllabus in detail, and the specialist advisory group, Tina Brain, Linda Hewitt, and Julia Toussaint-Jackson, who provided expert feedback on every aspect of the syllabus. Additionally, I'd like to thank Adrian Hallam, who composed the new sight reading. During this workshop, Ysolt will take you through the level 2 and 3 repertoire and technical work featured on the new Horn syllabus. If you have any questions throughout the course of the workshop, please feel free to type them in the chat or the Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom window, and we'll do our very best to answer them either during the course of the workshop if possible, or at the end if time permits. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce AMEB Horn Consultant Ysolt Clark. Ysolt is an acclaimed performer and educator based in Brisbane, Australia. Born in Canberra, Ysolt studied at the Canberra School of Music and was appointed Principal Third Horn of the Queensland Symphony Orchestra at age 21. Since leaving the QSO, Ysolt has been engaged regularly as a freelance horn player and has appeared in most major symphony orchestras around Australia. She is also committed to the chamber music and performs with Camerata, Queensland's chamber orchestra. Ysolt has worked with many ensembles, including Southern Cross Soloists, Elysian, and Lunaire Collective, performing in festivals throughout Australia as well as internationally. Ysolt is passionate about music education at all stages of development, from beginner to embarking professional. She works with students of all ages and experience with the aim of building confident, well-rounded musicians. For the past 20 years, Ysolt has been part of the renowned horn teaching team at Queensland Conservatorium, Griffith University. Here, she also co-directs the horn ensemble Q Horns and has conducted performances in Queensland, the United States, and Brazil. In addition to this, she teaches at several Brisbane schools and runs her own highly successful private teaching studio. Ysolt has been a brass examiner for the AMEB Queensland for the past 15 years. Welcome, Ysolt. Thanks very much for being with us today. Tell us about the new horn syllabus.
Good afternoon, David. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us on this second workshop of the afternoon. I'm really excited to explain some of the new points and changes and additions into level 2 and level 3 of the horn syllabus. And thanks, particularly to David, who we've worked for over a year now on this very closely, as well as to all the other consultants that gave a lot of really useful input into creating both the new grade books in level 1 and also the changes that have occurred in the manual list, as well as the very important changes to the technical workbook. So this afternoon in this workshop, I will start off with addressing the new setup for the technical work at level 2, and hopefully some tips about preparing for these changed technical work. And then also we'll touch on the orchestral excerpts, there's also a little bit of a change, simplification from the old syllabus. And then we'll move on to elements of the manual list. There's changed, some key new pieces that have been added, and a few of the sort of shuffled around that have occurred with the manual list. So moving to technical work, just as with level 1, there's a conscious effort to have exercises through each grade level. So specific exercises, we've got lip slurs, then there's tongued exercises and some mixed intervals of dominant sevenths, and chromatic exercises, and they occur in each grade level and they're structured so as they lead into each other. in grade 5, if we can have a look at 5A. 5A is directly comes from 4B. So if anyone ever has any issues with learning some of these slurs, always working on the slur before will help a lot. We just have a nice sort of B flat side lip slur over the range. I would highly encourage people working on this to also carry on a little bit lower, even if it's just for a bit of a release in playing in practice. So once you've done the second and third on B flat side, you can also do open on F side, etc. downwards. Just to reinforce too, for clarification, that in this book with the lip slurs, we have brackets around the B flat side fingerings. So hence we've got bracketed 0 is open fingering on B flat side. And then when we move to F side, it doesn't have brackets. So hopefully that, once the student becomes accustomed to that system, it should be automatic to read. So we've got a nice lip slur here. It's moving over the range. And that sequence of lip slurs. A couple of tips with those slurs is always aiming for the very last note, and perhaps sustaining it a little bit longer than you normally would to make sure that the air is carried through right to the very end. I always talk to students about sustaining without bulging. So we're binding the full length of the note to the next note. And for then students to look specifically at the joins between notes rather than seeing it as a series of notes that you have to produce without tonguing. We're binding those notes together with a continuous flow of air. And throughout all of these lip slurs in all the levels, you can often find a key that works really well. So whilst it starts on open F side and it goes up to the high F, which is well within the range for this level, often students particularly find 1 and thumb a little bit easier. So you don't need to start on the open fingering. It's really important to play with a beautiful sound in an area where you're comfortable and then bring it up back then into the slightly higher range with comfort and ease. Definitely don't want to build in extra tension. The introduction of lip slurs throughout this technical workbook is in line with what's occurred in the brass syllabus, and I think it's I think I might have mentioned it in the previous workshop, but honestly, if a student practices lip slurs all the time, I don't think they have any issue with sound quality. So of course, we don't always practice lip slurs for hours and hours, but if you're developing a nice sound and ease of playing over the range, the first place to start is with lip slurs. And you can always, use these slurs as a starting point and manipulate them when you're practicing them. You could just, highlight certain areas. For example, with this one, even just working on the C part of it, da, 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 like working on that area helps with the slightly higher the jump upwards with the slur. Anyway, so that's a nice little slur to work through, and then we move to 5B. So if we look at 5B, so within the slurs in level 2, we have both B flat side and F side slurs, and representing the fact that at this level it's expected, for the most part everyone's playing on a double or even a triple instrument, and you need to start having that understanding and ability to play across both sides. You're not always fluent with fingerings perhaps, but you can definitely play into both sides and you make them work for you when you need to. So this exercise is not only to help students become more accustomed with the harmonic series on the F side through this sort of zone, but also it's used as a preparation for lip trills. Lip trills in the past were something that suddenly get thrown in at a higher level and people are unprepared for it. Here we have an exercise that brings in the idea of the lip trill, and then will subsequently, as you'll see, it is explored a little bit more in grade 6. So a couple of tips with this is to definitely work on the first 2 bars first. So comfortably blowing through those note changes. And then the next section, consciously keeping those top notes really close together to try not to have a big shift as you go on to the top note. And again, with this really strong idea that you're blowing to the very last note of the phrase, you don't suddenly give up, you're always aiming to that last middle C. With those F side ones, they're always a little bit more effective when they are played orally, so when they're taught orally. I think when you look at the page, some students in particular worry a little bit, but if the teacher presents those notes over the 5 notes and then adds the note on top without really naming it, it's usually a bit more comfortable to play. I can see that we've got a question. Yes, that's a really good question. Thank you, Kate. So, so with the yes, you're talking about the B flats. B flat is not strictly a B flat. Yes, this is definitely harmonic series. It should sound a little bit out of tune, and of course, to a horn player's ear, and definitely to an examiner's ear, we're not looking for a B flat in tune. We're looking for those even notes on the harmonic series, and this is the same across the board. When we look at exercise 5A, the A won't be in tune either on open, but of course we're blowing through sort of well. So yes, thank you very much for that question. That's very good. Hopefully that answered it for you. So yes, play it as it naturally falls in the harmonic series. It's not about playing, those odd notes. They're not supposed to be in tune. Very good. So if we then look at 6B, it's essentially the same. It's essentially the same exercise as 5B, but this time instead of just doing quavers at the top, it's moved to being notated as semiquavers rather than quavers. But then we just move into a little trill at the top there. So it's just taken that same, and it just can be just simply played, and with that eye to blowing through more at the end. And moving backwards, we might look at 6A. So 6A is playing over the range on B flat side. And again, we have another note that would sound a little bit false in terms of, perfect intonation would be the written E flat on the open B flat side. But so this is just nice to learn to blow throughout the whole range of the instrument and to blow fully. And of course, with this exercise too, I'd really, highly encourage, especially at 6th grade, to continue this exercise into the F side. Of course, working into the F side with an exercise such as this, really you have to blow a lot further. You need a lot more air. It's a really nice experiment to play all of this exercise and then follow up with F side, follow with F side onwards, blowing, and then go back to the open B flat side, and you can see how you use so much more air on the F side. It's going to help you on B flat side. So fantastic, thanks Kate. So with exercise B, with the lip trill, no, it's not supposed to be rhythmic at all. It's what you can do. So a little bit of flexibility, like to look, you could start off, it's surely if you feel comfortable, you could start with doing straight semiquavers for the trill, but if you can move it into more of a trill feel, that would also be great. So the that answers your question. Fantastic, thank you for that question. But yes, so we're looking, you can start off with doing semiquavers and then move it as it feels naturally into more of a trill sort of feel. If we move now to 7A, yes, okay, now there's a good question about this one too within 7A. Where 4 valve combinations of the candidate's choice, including both the slurred and tongued versions, are required for examination purposes. So this is stating that you play through your first 2 bars, well, and then you immediately repeat tongued. So at grade 7 and grade 8, we have less of the tongued exercises that have happened previously. And so we're moving into this idea of practicing slurring and then playing tongued using the same sort of airstream. So we're learning how to blow through and then tongue as well. So you're going to play open, you can choose on choose 4 keys of your own choice. I mean, I personally would look at 4 keys right next to each other. So if you easily can do on open, second, first, and first and second, or perhaps first and second, second and third, open F side, second F side. So it's like I wouldn't be choosing personally, you know, random through the group, but you choose 4 different fingerings and then play all slurred, all tongued on each of those, and immediately with the repeat. So you can take a breath in between them, but it's just meant to sort of go straight through without much hold up. Yes, and then if we look at 7B, here we have sort of the next step in the lip trill process, where we are sort of demonstrating how the lip trill might work in context, both with the chance to play as an upper note trill and as the lower note trill. In some of our repertoire, we might choose to do either way. So, and it's encouraged to practice this not just in this key, but at grade 7, this is the only key that's required. Grade 8 is an identical exercise, but in different keys as well. So, so moving into sort of more useful you know, trills that you might find within repertoire, especially for things like Mozart 2, where you would do an A trill. So there's some you could use this exercise to do your own the key that works for your own repertoire. But typically we're doing our C trill first on the horn, and it's probably the easiest to play as well. Great. Okay, so just with these slurs in general, it's really important to be just be really committed with air flow through the phrase, and knowing that if you blow really well through the whole phrase, it's not just about slurring, it's also developing a better embouchure. So if we can, you know, not do any sort of really unusual things, trying to reach for the high notes or the low notes, just keep it as all like find that comfortable zone and then expand out from it. It's really good for more than just slurring. It's, you know, these lip slurs do more than just teach you to slur between 2 notes. Okay, now we might move on to 5C. So looking at 5C, look at 5C. Okay, so in the old syllabus, we had pages of dominant sevenths and diminished sevenths at high grades, and it was all a little bit daunting. They're very valuable exercises, and I still think they are valuable exercises to practice, but in the sort of stress of an exam, it's also quite tiring. And as well as I found that there's a little bit of a disconnect between students understanding what we're doing when we're playing a dominant seventh, what the reason for a dominant seventh is, what the value of a diminished seventh is. And so here we have an exercise which it finds more of a sort of a musical context where you might find dominant sevenths and diminished sevenths sort of within a sort of repertoire. I mean, I think particularly of repertoire in grade 6 where there are many, many diminished sevenths, and students practice diminished sevenths and yet can't recognise those patterns they've practiced within their repertoire. And I think by doing this exercise, it's much easier to recognise those patterns. But the goal would be a similar sort of goal and style to the old syllabus, in that it's nice, clear articulation, bouncy sound. So just a really nice sort of short exercise, but making very clear sort of both orally and in written terms what a dominant seventh is, what a diminished seventh is. With grade 5 and grade 6, you are required to also learn in other keys. And this is using the keys that you're expected to also be able to transpose and sight transpose. So we've got a little bit of crossover here. So it takes a little bit of thought and preparation to work on being able to transpose these exercises. But of course, it relates very closely to how music, when we transpose, is written for the horn. Typically, when we transpose on the horn, the music is written in C major. So being able to recognize as a starting point a C major arpeggio and how you transpose that in E flat or in D or in C is really important, and this exercise will help with that. So it's the identical exercise in 5C and 6C are the same, just slightly different keys required. And then moving into grade 7 and grade 8, very similar exercises with the same sort of harmonic structure, but with semiquavers and at a slightly faster speed as well. So just nice, simple demonstration. The student can understand the value of the harmony and how much we actually use it within repertoire, but without sort of pages and pages of work to be done in that area. Great. Now, I might talk a little bit briefly about double tonguing, triple tonguing, all those tonguing things. Of course, it's always great, you know, double tonguing, triple tonguing. Some students need to practice them more than others. I know definitely in my case, I've always had to work on double tonguing a lot. And I've, you know, in the previous repertoire, there were exercises for double tonguing, but it never quite linked into how, as horn players, we find a double tonguing within our repertoire. So in all of these exercises, so in 5D and then in 6D and 6E, we start using double tonguing, but a lot of the time the rhythms that are presented are more as you might find melodically within music. So much so, not in 5D, but in 6D, which is the double tonguing in 6th grade, is just William Tell Overture, but in a more friendly key. So you get used to, that's actually double tonguing as we use it. And then when we look at 6E, it's actually just the tonguing, the triple tonguing that you would find in Bolero. So you're learning how to, well, you're presenting your double tonguing and your triple tonguing for exam, but how you might have actually had to do it if you were playing those pieces. So in grade 8, it's very similar. In grade 7, there's slightly different exercise. So if you are the person who needs to work more on double tonguing, it's really good for the embouchure as well to work on these multiple tonguing forms. I would still, you know, encourage you to use Arban, which was where the previous exercises were drawn from, the Arban book. Also, there are other sources with lots of different exercises, or as simple as working through scales and scales of the grade. Probably over 1 octave is a really good option, but just working on those areas, and so that then you can play these exercises with a bit more sort of musical flair and enjoyment. Yeah. Oh, the other thing I would say about the double tonguing and triple tonguing exercises, just like lip slurs at a younger grade, to really focus on the air and the breath between each little fragment. It's, you know, the better the air, the easier the double tongue occurs. But people do tend to naturally fixate about the action of what double tonguing or triple tonguing means to them, which means they hold back their air. Whereas if they can think lower in their body about where they're breathing, how they breathe, it's much easier to achieve. So in grade 5, there is, just because the other grades have more of sort of mixed interval built into what's required, but in grade 5 there is a mixed interval exercise. It is a bit of a follow-on from the mixed interval exercise found in grade 4, and it's just looking for like an even approach to sound over this range, just simple F major scale, really would, but you know, also a little bit more accented. I would really encourage students to work in different keys for this. This is a really good time because it's so short, and it is sometimes a little bit, the second half of it might be a little bit more challenging, but if it's worked more thoroughly in D and in E flat, then moving into the F version as printed is a bit easier. And of course, it really does need that strong oral pull of what you're trying to play in terms of the notes. Yeah. I now will I'll talk very quickly about the stopped exercises. So it's very valuable that, I mean, it's expected that from about grade 6, students can stop and have started developing their stopping. And of course, there's now an opportunity to look a little bit into stopping even in grade 4, should you want to. Stopping often takes a little bit of time to develop. So at grade 6, we just have a very simple exercise where the pitch is laid out really clearly. So we have, we have just a C, and then you have a rest, so there's opportunity to move your hand, and then you have the stopped C. So at least the pitch is given first. So not sure how Zoom likes my stopped playing, but anyway, hope you get the idea. So we have that nice exercise, a bit of an opportunity to work with hand position so that you can really match the pitch from the first bar to the second bar. Couple of little tips, when you stop, the activity of your air and the commitment of your air is absolutely heightened. You really, however much air you think you're using, you can always encourage a bit more with the stop notes. The other thing is the position of the hand in the bell. One, not to push the hand too far into the bell, leave it where it is in its normal position. It's a bit more tricky with small hands, but it is possible. So don't push your hand too far in to stop, because that's when the pitch goes up quite considerably. So you often notice with stopping that when big people are beginning stopping, they play quite sharp. If you leave your hand where it is and you seal off, it should hold the pitch really well. And I like to think of your hand almost being angry and expanding out against the metal. So it's this feeling of the metal around your hand, but really pushing against it. And that's when you can get that really sort of vital sort of stoppy sound. It's not just a case of covering, it's almost like you're covering, but with a little bit of anger happening at the same time. But it's such an awesome effect to happen on the horn, and it's actually quite good to work on stopping in terms of increasing, energy in your air and, solidifying pitch. It's a good exercise in itself to stop. Looking at grade 7 with the stopped notes, we actually moved to where you have to play open and then stopped without an opportunity to move your hand. So this is the little bit more of a challenge that occurs starting on that note. So in this case, we have the fingering set up for the stopped note, and then you only have to move the hand. So you've already played, so the exercise is designed to play on F horn so that the stopping works well, and you just close across and you get the next note. And then moving to, if we look at exercise 8F, we have a short melody that really incorporates both stopped techniques and hand muted techniques within the same phrase. So stopping, of course, raises the pitch a semitone, which means we finger from below. Hand muting is when you play the note above and then you cover over gradually until it comes down a semitone. So this little tune incorporates both of those concepts, which is really appropriate to this level of playing. That nice combination of the you'll finger a B flat for the last A, then open to the B flat, and then you finger an A flat and then open to an A. So it's a nice little phrase that incorporates all of those things within technique, and really bringing into focus how important it is that a student can demonstrate control over right hand and not just things with the left hand. Yeah, so the very final technical exercises within this, within level 2 are the chromatic scales. So just as with level 1, we've chosen to remove the simple chromatic scale exercises from the scale list and place them into more of an exercise form. So we have more of this, it's nicer to get a feeling for fingering patterns rather than just over 1 octave or 2 octaves, as the case may be. And it's more recognizable in repertoire in terms of learning fingering at perhaps a little bit of a faster speed. But on top of that, it's stretching into the extremes of the range. So intentionally, this brings you into the higher moments on the horn and the lower moments. And with, for the most part, I think grade 8 is the exception with that, but for the most part, you reach the high note and then you have to come back down again. So you're not actually stopping on your high note, you have to blow through the change, which is, really good for air. So just getting used to playing through chromatic passages as perhaps they're more likely to be found in repertoire, and using these exercises to expand into the extremes. When you're preparing for an exam, a good idea would be to, if there are issues at either end of the range, would be to work easily into the edge of what's possible, and then each week or each day, whatever, add a semitone so it's done with ease and not some sudden sort of jolt or change to the technique. So they're sort of designed not just for, chromatic facility with the left hand, but also a general sort of approach to range building, hopefully done with ease. And that's all of the technical work. I didn't actually talk. You can notice that I've missed this. Might mention the scales very quickly. The big thing with the scales, firstly, no set list, so it's much sort of shorter idea of what you learn. It's fixed list of scales, of which the examiner would pick a few to demonstrate. We have it's a slightly smaller range, and particularly 7th grade, there are a lot more 2 octave rather than 3 octave scales, so that there can be more focus on the quality of sound over the range rather than trying to achieve these very great details. Alongside of that, there's an expectation that the student works into both louder dynamics and softer dynamics with the scale, which helps them sort of have a better awareness of sound quality in itself. Often students can I guess we can all fall into the trap of playing through scales without really having our sound sensors on, really sort of contributing to the best possible sound. When we talk about change of dynamic, it's more easy to conceive of that sound quality. And reminding you, of course, that when you're working on it, it's forte, but forte with a beautiful resonant full sound. It's piano, but piano with also a resonant, useful, beautiful sound quality. You don't want to play these scales with a dead sound. Really nice and lively is great. On top of that, to reflect what students do, is try to really specify that there are perhaps more than one way of tonguing on the horn in particular. So we often play with more of a bouncy staccato style, just with a bit of separation between notes, and then also this legato style of tonguing. And so in level 2, it's expected that not only can you slur, but you play fully sustained legato da style articulation for legato tongue, and then more of it maybe a marcato light clear 2 style staccato tonguing. So again, a lot of that work can come from sort of oral concepts. So if the student hears the separation between notes, it's easier to play that way. So it's really good to, it's really good to work on that. No, the choice of whether it is tongued or slurred, legato tongue, staccato tongue, comes from the examiner. So, for example, it would make sense for the examiner to ask for one scale or arpeggio to be forte, and then the following one piano. Within reason, just a nice, comfortable thought between those. It's not asking for fortissimo or pianissimo. It's just to show the difference between those things. So you often find that students within the examination room, you'll find that there are students who only play forte in the scales in particular, or vice versa, only play piano. And this is a really good area to make sure that those students who only play forte are also looking at the softer end of the spectrum, and vice versa. We've got all of that sort of covered in an assessment situation. So do let me know if there's any other question about those scales. I do think with scales too that sometimes with pitching can be a little bit more tricky. Being very confident with pitching in the start notes of scales at level 2 is really important, but it's also made easier when you have a regular place to breathe. So these scales all have a written in location where you can breathe. It's much easier to have the pitch set up, so when you breathe, you know you're just going straight to the second degree of the scale. So moving on to list D. So list D, of course, for horn at level 2 is our excerpt list. Probably like two major changes with list D. One, for every grade level, it's only 4 excerpts, which is in line with what brass has been doing for quite a long time, but horns have been overworking for a little bit. But yeah, so only 4 excerpts. And the other really happy, pleasing situation is that it's all contained within the book. So we have all the orchestral excerpts within the technical workbook, and so you can use it as your own reference as well for learning other excerpts. But it's all contained within. With those, some of the excerpts have been brought over from the old syllabus, so there've been some retained for those people who have their favourites that they always work on with students, and then we have some newer alternatives. Firstly, for a bit of a change in interest, to bring in some extra sort of aspects that weren't covered in the past, and there also needed to be a little bit of a change because we've reduced the amount of transposition in the excerpts, especially in 6th grade. So because we're only asking for 4 excerpts, and then there were previously 7 different transposition keys required at 6th grade. We've just brought it back, so we've only given at 6th grade those 4 different keys to be transposed into. Well, one of them's F, so no transposition for that. So for grade 5 and 6, the student prepares 4 excerpts, 1 from each key. So you'll have 1 in F, 1 in E flat, 1 in D, and 1 in C. There are, I think, 3 options for F, 3 for E flat, 2 for D, 3 for C. So you have a choice. You're not sort of stuck into only preparing that 1 D excerpt. You have a few different options. And then, of course, within the examination room, the examiner will choose 2 of those for performances, for the performance. For grade 7 and 8, there are many more keys included. And there's many more in F actually, but also in multiple other transpositions. So you just prepare 4 excerpts, but in 4 different keys. So you can choose which keys you would like to do. There's definitely, especially in grade 7 and 8, and in grade 5 and 6, there are a few more excerpts that are geared to the horn player that prefers to work into the low range. And in fact, in grade 7 and 8, there's also a few options where both parts are given as that could be, either excerpt could be chosen. For example, with the Beethoven 3 so you can play either the first horn part or the second horn part. So there's no need to play both of them, but it's good. And it's that also when you have both parts that you can work on. Also, I think Beethoven 7 in grade 8, you can work on with your teacher playing, the teacher can play the other part. So there's a bit more sort of collaborative work in the teaching room as well. With the preparation of excerpts, having examined over, multiple years and prepared students for multiple exams, there's really only one secret to doing these orchestral excerpts well, and that's just listening to them. I tend to be very clear with students and just say 50% listening, 50% playing. It's not a case of listening once and then just going off and forever just playing what you think you've heard one time 3 weeks ago. It's even within each practice session, 50% listening, listen, play, listen, play. So much of the work can be done just by copying what you hear played with the orchestra. These excerpts have been chosen that they are really obviously heard. They're excerpts that are sort of hidden in the depths of the orchestral texture. These are ones that can be heard once they're located. It's also, of course, very, very good to listen to not just that excerpt, but a whole movement or the whole piece. But so much of the work can be done by listening, perhaps even playing along. And that, of course, also helps with all the transposition as well. So you have this, you're not having to think about the transposition, you just hear how it works. Yeah, the other couple of points with those excerpts is don't forget to investigate when the work was written. So to be thoughtful about the required sound quality that would suit that period of time. Of course, classical sound is different to, romantic. There's lots of different romantic sounds that we might choose to use. And also the understanding that there's a sort of a different articulation style that's found within the earlier excerpts compared to the later excerpts, and to consider that when preparing those excerpts. So I don't know whether there's any other questions about the excerpts, but yeah, they should be a nice, it's a broad selection to choose from, and hopefully sort of nice and interesting, trying to choose excerpts as well that you'll find in other locations. So it's not just preparing them for exam. These are excerpts that are often used in youth orchestra auditions or other situations. So moving on to the manual list. I wanted to talk about some new inclusions in the manual list. And we'll talk through both level 2 and level 3 with the manual list, and also just giving some sort of overview of the certificate grade, which is the new grade that lies between grade 8 and AMAs. It's more of a sort of performance opportunity that lies at that point. There has also been, so there's a few new pieces that have been added in, and there's also a couple of minor adjustments that are worth pointing out with these pieces. A few sort of pieces of slightly shifted grades to reflect, the slight change of standards, especially the range in grade 7 has been reduced slightly, thankfully. So, some of the pieces have sort of shifted around a little bit for that. The biggest tip when it comes to choosing repertoire, and especially with an eye to moving forward in your examination journey, is to choose with variety of time periods, variety of articulation styles. Don't get stuck just doing majority tongued pieces or majority slurred pieces. Variety of compositional periods, something really sort of more classical, something a little bit more modern. It's good to stretch, even if the piece that you've stretched with, even if you use it as extra list, really good to investigate a lot of different types, and that in itself helps you as you move on to the next level. So in the exam, you are assessed on your ability to create, especially when you get into the high levels, create a nice varied program, but it's also for technique and exploration of different musical sounds and styles. So do looking at sort of different pieces. So the first thing I wanted to talk about quickly was actually list A across grade 5, grade 6, grade 7, grade 8. Often list A is using our study books that we use, and so of course most teachers will go towards using the same study books for grade 5, grade 6, grade 7, or grade 6, grade 7, grade 8, and so you want your nice set of study books that cover a few of those bases. And I certainly have my favourites that I lean to. Of course, all of the ones on the manual list are fantastic and varied in their own way, but I just wanted to give a few suggestions of where I might start with when I was, if I were preparing a student within that level 2. Of course, in grade 5, we still have our old favourite Anton Horner book, which it's an absolute classic through level 1, and there are some really, really valuable studies to work on that can be presented at grade 5, and so it's a really good place to start. I really like all of the Mueller studies. There are studies from both book 1 and book 2 throughout level 2. These are really good studies, I find, for building a really strong sort of focused sound quality that moves with ease over the range. Mueller often, his studies don't sit too high. They go over a nice sort of 2-octave range, but it's very easy to develop more of a consistent sound quality when you play these studies. And alongside of that, he's very sort of, there's a lot of articulation variation. So if a student's finding it hard to learn how to do mixed articulations, too slurred, too tongued, all of those sort of things, there are lots of exercises where you can sort of transition between different types of tonguing styles, which then, or tonguing patterns, I should say. So it's a really good, they are really good books. For me, they're probably in practice a little bit more comfortable than Coprash. I mean, Coprash always has its place, but Mueller just tends to go a little bit lower and has a little bit more of harmonic variation, especially in book 2. Moves into some more different keys. I really like the Shoemaker legato studies. Shoemaker, they're based on the Conconi slurred studies. The Shoemaker studies, there are a few options there which are primarily bass clef studies, really good for students that may not quite have a vision of phrasing. There's a really nice opportunity to work into phrase, nice even sound as you slur through the range, especially if you wanted to learn bass clef and move into the lower range as well. Some higher ones as well. I like in the earlier grades, there's an old book but new to the syllabus with the Protag preparatory melodies. These all deal with specific technical issues. They usually lend themselves well to practice in transposition as well, but they're technical issues, but really constructed in a very musical way. There's usually a very clear musical style required for each of these studies. So really good if a student hasn't quite sort of nutted out change of character, something's, soft and gentle slur versus something with tongued and accents, just stretching into those different characters that we play as horn players. That's a really, they're quite short studies, those ones as well. They're quite, and they're never in the extremes of the range. So lot of musically interesting without being sort of stressful to play, the Protag preparatory melodies. Really, really happy that some Kling studies have been included. The Kling study book, 40 studies, is fantastic. It's a go-to whether you use the book within the exam or not. It's really good for creating an even sound quality through changing range, and even good, beautiful sound quality. A really clear sense of phrase is required. There are several studies where there's a lot of low playing required and quite into the depths of the range, but despite being in the low range, a musical opinion is still required. So we have this just really nice, they're tuneful studies. They're definitely melodic, the Kling studies, but with a lot of technical reward from working on them. And then my old favorite in terms of studies, it may be more around the grade 6 level, are the Slur unaccompanied studies, or Etudes. It's definitely a book, the Slur book, Gunter Slur book, is definitely a book that students sometimes approach with a little bit of anxiety, because it is set within a 12-tone musical language rather than normal sort of tonal language. But whilst students can be anxious at the start, multiple occasions students have then come out at the end after learning some of the studies feeling a lot more confident and being able to play anything that's sort of put in front of them. It's definitely something that builds confident pitching tactics in being able to play unusual intervals, for example, major sevenths or augmented fourths, really well with confidence, and also slightly more complex rhythms and how to approach complex rhythms without, being scared. So being able to do those read complex rhythms with a sense of pragmatism. I do encourage when students are playing these to practice them in the beginning in very short sessions. You could practice them for 6 minutes, time them 6 minutes or 8 minutes at a time, but demand that it's a fully focused 6 minutes, so that they're really acknowledging and hearing the pitch as they play the notes, and not just hoping that the notes are right, not playing the note incorrectly and then moving back. So, but yeah, definitely worth the effort, those studies. And from grade 7 onwards, so through to certificate, there are a few new studies by the Brazilian horn pedagogue Mueller. These Brazilian studies. They're all based on a little Brazilian tune, like a folk song or a well-known tune in Brazil. And I find they're very interesting. They're very musically engaging, but they're actually, the result, technically speaking, is quite close to what the Coprech studies provide. So for me, I really like working on these Brazilian studies because we can get what we get from Coprech, but with listening to a more interesting tune. It also tends to set up so the beginning of the study is in comfortable range and then gradually stretches outwards. Really good for focus sound articulation. But also like with a good sort of musical content. Moving on to grade 8 with a couple of the studies, I do like, there's the Barberato Etudes Classique book. Again, this is a technical result from really delving into one particular musical style, and each one of the studies is a quite different musical style, and it's usually quite clear. There's one that's more in a Bach style, perhaps a Bach toccata style. There's one that's very much in a classical concerto Mozart style. There's one that sounds a bit more like Stravinsky. So you have an idea, you can delve more into that style and then work on the technique that's required for it. So that's a really well worth looking into book, the Barberato Etudes Classique. So that's my main sort of overview for List A, and perhaps some of the books that you might not have already used, besides, the ever used Coprech. Maxime Alphonse is also great to work into. But then some other books that can be used for studies at List A, and a lot of them have got such strong musical content. They aren't just studies. They require, this control of playing, a sense of internal pulse when you play, but yet also enjoyable to play and to listen to. Okay, so moving into the List B and C sections from grade 5. So we look at grade 5 in List B. For me, the old favourite is always going to be the second movement of Mozart 3. I think it's a really nice time for the student, especially working in transposition, to play this movement and get a taste of what it's like to play Mozart. Usually the musical sophistication and understanding is a bit tricky, but it's a great piece to play. Also on the List B, there's an edition of the arranged Telemann Sonata. It wasn't originally written for horn, but it's a really good, the Egger edition is a really good piece, and there's a movement included in both in grade 5 and grade 6 and grade 7, and it's very popular and nice for students to play. It's quite a good piece as well if a student is keeping a little bit lower in the range. It's a good piece to work on for that. In List C, a piece to look out for is the Dumas Pavane Verrier, which I think is a little bit more musical sophistication, a bit more of the French style, but it's a really lovely piece in List C as a new piece. And then Lachlan Davidson, Victorian composer, has written a piece called Wagtag, also very popular for students. It's a bit more of a modern feel. And with this modern feel, it's a good time to mention that throughout all of these grades, sometimes in List A and sometimes in List C, there has been an effort to include more of a jazzy style or a contemporary style of playing for horn. So there is repertoire in every grade level that has, for students who in particular are looking for more of a sort of a jazz feel, but still valuable. So there's Lowell Shaw pieces included. There's some Karen Bailey pieces that have been used in the other brass instruments, and there's a horn version that has, so some of those pieces are used in grade 6. there's some pieces from the book called Latino for Horn. There's also in grade 5, there's still those pieces, the Ramskill Jazzed Up 2, which are quite good for students who are into jazzy styles. At grade 8, there's a Thomas McConaughey 10 Jazzy Etudes for low horn. So it's both low horn and jazzy. It's a lot of fun. And as well, of course, as the Murray studies that I just mentioned, which are definitely have that sort of Latin or Brazilian flavour to them, a little bit more contemporary. In terms of manual list changes in grade 6, probably the big change is with repertoire that's already been in existence is that On Earland, Botz's On Earland has been moved from grade 5 to grade 6. It's always been impressive when people play that piece well at grade 5, but it was a bit out of step with the rest of the pieces. It's a lot more challenging to play, so it's been moved into grade 6, and it's a really rewarding piece to work on at that level. There are a few pieces throughout grade 5, grade 6, and grade 7 from there's a collection called Romantic Album for Horn, and the one that sticks out, and one of my favorite ones in grade 6 is List B, is Maya Nacht. It's a very beautiful piece. We're always going to have Franz Strauss Nocturno that we'll do in List B, but we also have Maya Nacht is in a very sort of similar late romantic style with sort of extremes of dynamic, but with slightly different flavour to the Franz Strauss Nocturno. Yes. And I have been asked to remind you all that the vocalese, just to make sure that you check your list. So vocalese and the Sasson's Romance, which have always been part of the grade 5 repertoire, have now changed lists. So there are a couple of little changes like that, basically based on the fact that List C is supposed to be post 1900. So we made sure that the pieces that were in List C were written in that particular time frame. So so it's worth, of course, when you're constructing your new repertoire from these manual lists, do check, because it is different, but for the most part it's very similar. Within List C of grade 6, of course, I always have a fondness for alla caccia or the Cook Rondo. Really good to work into those sort of tongued 6/8 horn playing styles. I think they're great. But as well as that, there's the Richard Bissell Ghost Rider, which is a good piece to work on, and also Elizabeth Raum Romance for Horn. That's a good piece to do. So moving into grade 7, probably in terms of repertoire change, the key thing to be aware of at grade 7 is that Franz Strauss Concerto and Richard Strauss First Concerto have swapped their locations, essentially. So Richard Strauss the Strauss 1 Concerto has moved to grade 8, and the Franz Strauss Concerto First Movement only has moved to grade 7. Now, there's multiple lot of reasons for this, but primarily, examiners see students overstretch in their preparation of Strauss 1 at grade 7. It's much more appropriate in grade 8 to do a really good job of the work. And as educators, we find that by playing Franz Strauss Concerto prior to playing Strauss 1, it sets up a lot of the playing techniques that are required. So it makes a lot more sense to have the Franz Strauss Concerto in grade 7, where you learn a lot of the playing, the structure even of the piece and the playing styles required, so then you can bring that into Strauss 1 that you play in grade 8. Other pieces in grade 7 that I would like to sort of just quickly mention, I really like in List C, there's the Eric Larson Concertino. It's a beautiful piece of music. It's particularly well suited to students perhaps who struggle a little bit into the high range but are conscious in trying to build into it, because the high notes that are contained are part of the phrase. It's very nice, sweet, expressive. The last movement is, it's a lot of fun, and it has a lot of very sort of typical horn techniques. But yeah, I'd highly recommend looking at that piece, which is new in. So with grade 8, as mentioned before, we have Strauss 1 into list B. We've got the classics of Strauss 1, Mozart 2, and, you know, the second and third movements of the Beethoven sonatas. We have really good solid repertoire to choose from in list B. And in list C, of course, the main pieces that you can look at would be pieces like Villanelle or En Forêt, but lots of other choices. So Certificate of Performance is a new grade that lies between grade 8 and AMERS. It's designed as, and it's within all the instruments within the AMEB syllabus, designed as a bit more of a performance opportunity, a chance for students to play a group of pieces as more of a recital without the, you know, the added heightened demands that is found within the AMERS and the LMARS exam. I'm really excited by Certificate of Performance, especially as its use for Year 12 students. So Year 12 students preparing for their music extension performances should be able to find pieces that then flow through they can use in their certificate performance exam as well. And so they're getting extra performance opportunities, which will help them in their music performances at school. But nevertheless, it's designed to be an enjoyable performance experience without that stress of being AMERS. The big thing with certificate and AMERS and LMARS is these programs are constructed on length of time rather than number of pieces. So for horn, it's been decided like you need to present 3 pieces, but you don't have to always present 4 as long as you've fulfilled your length of time. So I don't want to mention exactly the times just in case I get it wrong, but within the syllabus you can see exactly the length of time required for certificate, or it's a band of time. So, you know, and that includes the breaks between pieces. So you can, if you have lots of short pieces, if you have 3 short pieces, with all of those 3 grades, you can add an extra piece. That's fine from any of those lists, from list A, B, or C. But especially in AMERS, there are some really long pieces, and so it's good to have that opportunity to play a full concerto and then not have to play 3 extra pieces on top of that as previous. So, but with Certificate of Performance, the structure of list A, B, and C is that list A is an unaccompanied piece, and there's options of playing, you know, pieces composed much earlier as well as more modern options. And list B is pre-1900 with piano, and list C is post-1900 with piano. With the certificate, I'll get my list out to talk through some of those pieces with certificate, but there are, especially in the unaccompanied section, there is a whole ream of really exciting, interesting, rewarding pieces to play and to work on, many of which would work really well then within an 8R assessment, music extension performance assessment, because they have lots of different qualities that can be discussed also in the written word. So I really do like the Barberato Cinq pieces, 5 poetic pieces. They're really good. The Berg horn call is definitely on the more challenging end of certificate, but a really rewarding and expressive, bold piece. Alan Holly's First Light was recently written in 2021, is a little bit simpler, but it's a great Australian piece written just after lockdowns came away, so that was great. I would highly recommend the Madsen Dream of the Rhinoceros. Really expressive, works really well in this performance situation. Has a few extended techniques, but really well written and easy to achieve. And of course, a big favourite in the list A of certificate is the Paul Stanhope Dawn Interlude. It's really commonly performed, and it's really fantastic that it can be included on this syllabus. It's a really, really good piece, very expressive, uses a little bit of extended technique, but in a really well written way. Within list B, I think probably, you know, the easy highlight to look at would be the opportunity to play 2 or 3 movements from Mozart 4. So commonly at this level, students do like to play the Mozart 4 rondo. You can play the second movement and the third movement, which would work really well in a performance situation. And then in list C, we also have the Neuling Bagatelle for those students who really like their low virtuosic playing, the Jane Vignery Sonata, which is a fantastic piece of music, and also the York Bowen Sonata, which is a really good play as well. Lots of other good pieces, but they're the ones that stand out to me at certificate, which could add together as a really nice performance experience with varied content. So moving on to associate, so I can say now, because I can see it written down clearly, so with AMAs, you're looking for a balanced and varied program of not less than 25 minutes and not more than 40 minutes. So this way, if you do choose to play one of those longer pieces, you can bring in a couple of shorter pieces from, say, list A and list C, and then 3 pieces is all that's required. In list A, a couple of pieces to look out for. Of course, commonly in list A, Laudatio is played, the Bernard Kroll piece. Works really well in combination with other pieces, which is to be considered. But also the Richard Bissell Lone Call and Charge. It's a fantastic piece of music. And I also really do like the Persichetti Parable. Definitely has some challenging moments, but can be a really rewarding performance and learning experience. There is the option of playing excerpts instead of list A or in addition to list A if time permits, but these excerpts are major work excerpts, so playing several selected passages from Mahler 5, for example. So often students really at this point in time do really get into playing Mahler 5, or perhaps they've had that experience of playing Mahler 5. This is a really good time to include big sections of excerpts, also Bach B minor Mass. Similar thing happens in ELMAs. So, but for some students within a performance exam like AMAs and ELMAs, it doesn't make sense to do excerpts, and especially some of these really challenging high excerpts within context, a bit more challenging. So you don't have to do excerpts. It's an option as part of your list A if you choose to, and time permits. In list B of AMAs, I think again we have classic pieces that are always played. Mozart 3 in its entirety works really well from memory. It's a great piece to play. Also, of course, Beethoven Sonata and Strauss 1. These are the ones that, as an examiner, you commonly see at AMAs, but also really great pieces to play. Looking at list C, a couple of the additions, the Francais Divertimento is it's a beautiful contrast and very, very stylistic, change compared to, say, a Mozart concerto, Strauss concerto that you play in list B. Andrea Clearfield's River Melos is also a bit of a change of style. That's very good. And moving into ELMAs, a couple of pieces that I would look out for in ELMAs for those students who choose to undertake that level. At list A, the Apostol Sonatine, it's really good. Of course, doing sections of a Bach cello suite where your level of musical sophistication should be well developed. It's a really nice choice. Of course, the inclusion of the Messiaen Appel Interstellaire is fantastic. It's really commonly played by students, and really nice to have its location on this syllabus. It's really major work of horn repertoire in the last 100 years, so it's good to include it on this list. And also, one of my favourite pieces is the Widmann Air. It uses quite a few sort of more extended techniques, harmonic series works, prescribed valve, positions and stuff like that, but really, really, really atmospheric, incredibly well written for the instrument. In list B, pieces to look out for, of course, Mozart 4 in its entirety. And also the Weber Concertino often lends itself really well for that. And then in looking at list C, the Richard Bissell Song of a New World, fantastic piece of music. Ruth Gibbs Horn Concerto, Glier Concerto, and I really do like the Kirshner three poems, Tre Poemi. A lot of, again, some extended techniques, very, very expressive, really, really remarkable in performance, as well as, you know, Strauss 2 for those who look forward to playing Strauss 2 in their Elmas exams. So that is a brief, hopefully brief overview of all the changes and the additions that are found within the manual list for level 2 and level 3. I'm really excited about the possibilities of performance that this will present for students, and the, you know, hopefully the enjoyment that people will find by playing through all of this repertoire. There are some truly exceptional and exciting pieces that have been included now, and I can't wait for students to get their hands on them and start working on some new repertoire, of course, as well, of course, as the, you know, the really traditional works like Mozart and Strauss, which need to continue forever. Anyway, I don't know if there's any more questions, but I can see David's come to tell me something, ask me something.
No, I'm just thank you so much for this workshop, Ysolt. There's so much repertoire, so much new repertoire as well. I think everyone should be super excited to explore, and we'd love to hear people's feedback on what they think of it and what pieces they're working on. If there are any more questions, quickly send them through, because I think we'll be wrapping up very shortly. But yeah, what has been your favorite sort of part of this whole process, Ysolt?
I'm definitely fond of the grade books, and especially and now that I'm working with students on the grade books, it's really exciting. I mean, Firstly, because we've got new repertoire, and there are a lot of pieces in the old grade books, and you can still use the old grade books. There's a lot of pieces that were really valuable, and I really enjoyed teaching, but I had taught them a lot. But these new pieces that just, they're a lot of fun, and they promote a lot of conversation, I find, with students as well. The fourth grade pieces in particular, it feels like a really collaborative education experience now. The students are coming to the pieces rather than just being told you should do this. They're like, oh, what does this mean? Or how does this work? Or I listened to this piece of music. So it's promoting sort of a bit more extra learning. I mean, I love including all the new pieces. I'm very, very fond of both studies and unaccompanied works and modern unaccompanied works. That's where a lot of my field of interest really lies. And to see a whole lot of these now on the manual list, and some really fantastic study works. But things like seeing the Widman on the list, it deserves to be there. It was written, I think, in it's either late 90s or maybe 2005 from memory. But these are great pieces to be on the list now, and I'm excited that they will get a bit more airing, because
absolutely, and people may be completely unaware of these pieces as well. So it's good that, you know, people have more things to go explore and try new things.
I know that there's always more pieces coming out, and that's exciting. But finding a way for these pieces to fit within the standards required for each grade has been really good. Working with a great bunch of people, including Tina, who's obviously online today. Hi, Tina. And of course with you, David, it's been really, really good, and it's been exciting for me this year to now start working with students with all of this material. So
absolutely, and we look forward to hearing it all in examinations and some recitals as well. I don't think there's any more questions, so I think we might just leave it there for today. But thank you so much for that very insightful and passionate workshop. There's so much. There were so many pieces that went to this whole process. And
sorry that it was like this, but yes. But it's just good to throw some ideas out there, because I know what it's like to look at a list of pieces and go, where do I start? And this, hopefully for everyone listening today, watching today, now you know with some of these new pieces where a good place to start might be, or even just in your listening to see what you could look at to choose.
And on that, the new Horn syllabus and gradebooks and other resources are available now via your local music shop, via AMEB online, ameb.edu.au, and via other online sheet music retailers. Thanks again to the AMEB Horn Syllabus and Publications team, Ysolt Clark, of course, Daryl Paulson, Tina Brain, Linda Hewitt, and Julia Toussaint Jackson, as well as the sight reading composer Adrian Hallam. Our editing and proofreading team, and the many Australian and international composers whose works made the grade books, and obviously the lists look very good. Thanks also to behind the scenes teams, Bernadette Pasquale, AMEB CEO, Helena Jones, Maxine Day, and Ilana Codwell for making this workshop possible. And last, certainly not least, to everyone who has attended this workshop. We're very proud of the new AMEB Horn Series 2 publications and new syllabus, and we hope they serve the Horn community as useful and inspired resource for years to come.